The Germans still had overwhelming numbers, and they adapted. Instead of massed assaults, they began probing attacks, small groups advancing from multiple directions, trying to locate weak points in the American line. Mortar fire increased, walking closer with each adjustment. Shrapnel tore through branches overhead. Dirt and pine needles rained down on the gun crews. Coolidge moved constantly, crouching behind each Browning, correcting aim, ordering short, controlled bursts to conserve ammunition. He carried spare ammunition himself, dragging belts through the mud, ignoring the rounds snapping past his head. Fear was contagious, but so was calm. His voice never rose. That mattered more than anything else. By mid-afternoon, the rain had turned to sleet. Men's hands were numb. Steam rose from overheated barrels. One machine gun crew lost a man to shrapnel. Coolidge slid into the position, took the dead man's place, and kept firing until a replacement crawled forward. When another crew hesitated under incoming fire, he stood upright beside them, fully exposed, pointing where to shoot. The sight of him standing there, calm and deliberate, shamed fear out of the men. They stayed on the guns. The Germans attacked again near dusk, their most determined effort yet. Mortars bracketed the hilltop. Infantry pushed forward behind the explosions. Coolidge waited until they were inside 30 yards. Then he ordered every gun to fire at once. The forest erupted in muzzle flash and thunder. The assault collapsed. Survivors dragged themselves back into the trees. Night fell. The attack stopped. The Germans withdrew, leaving their dead where they lay. Hill 623 held. At first light on October 25th, American infantry pushed forward and discovered the truth. A single heavy machine gun section, led by one technical sergeant, had stopped an entire German company. Dozens of enemy bodies lay in the woods below the hill. Coolidge refused evacuation despite shrapnel wounds and exhaustion. He stayed with his men until relieved. Technical Sergeant Charles Coolidge received the Medal of Honor for his actions in the Vosges Mountains. He never claimed heroism. He said only that someone had to keep the men from breaking, and he was the highest rank there. If the story moved you, hit like. It helps keep these stories alive. Subscribe for more forgotten battles and ordinary men who did extraordinary things. Drop a comment and tell us where you're watching from. You're not just a viewer. You're part of remembering them. Coolidge understood what that meant. Time no longer favored him. Discipline and courage had carried his men through 3 days of combat. But discipline could not replace ammunition, and courage could not stop mortars forever. If the Germans brought heavier weapons, 75mm infantry guns, concentrated artillery, or armor, the hill would become indefensible. Holding Hill 623 had never been the ultimate objective. Survival was. He made a decision that few commanders were willing to make without orders. He would hold as long as possible, inflict maximum casualties, then disengage under cover of darkness before the Germans could annihilate his force. Withdrawal was not defeat. Staying until destruction would help no one. Throughout the afternoon of October 26th, the Germans continued their pressure. Smaller attacks, heavy fire, constant harassment designed to wear his men down. Coolidge rationed ammunition carefully now. Short bursts only. No firing at suspected movement. Every round had to count. When German infantry tested the perimeter, they were met with sudden, precise fire that convinced them the Americans were still stronger than they really were. That illusion mattered. As dusk approached, American artillery increased its fire behind the German lines. Coolidge did not know whether this was coincidence or coordination, but he used it. The shelling masked sound. Explosions drowned movement. Visibility dropped as smoke mixed with fog. He gathered his squad leaders and gave quiet instructions. No talking. No lights. Carry the wounded. Leave nothing usable behind. At full darkness, the Germans launched another probe. Coolidge ordered his guns to fire briefly, violently, then stop. The sudden silence suggested ammunition exhaustion or confusion. It was bait. While the Germans hesitated, Coolidge began pulling his men back in small groups, moving downslope through covered routes he had memorized over the past 3 days. One gun crew at a time. one rifle team at a time. The last men out were the machine gunners. Coolidge stayed until the end. He personally disabled both Brownings, smashing feed mechanisms and removing key parts before abandoning them. The Germans would not turn those guns against American troops. Only then did he move. The withdrawal took nearly 2 hours. German fire followed them intermittently, but the enemy never fully realized what was happening. When German infantry finally pushed onto Hill 623 before dawn, they found empty foxholes, broken machine guns, and the bodies of their own dead. The Americans were gone. Coolidge linked up with friendly forces before sunrise on October 27th. His section had survived. For wounded, no one killed. Battalion headquarters finally learned what had happened on Hill 623 when survivors reported in. What they described seemed impossible. A single heavy machine gun section, led by one technical sergeant, had held off an enemy force more than 10 times its size for 3 days without support, without resupply, without orders. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor followed. Investigators reviewed casualty counts, terrain, timelines. German losses were estimated at over 70 killed and wounded. The conclusion was unavoidable. Charles Coolidge had not just defended a hill. He had prevented a breakthrough that would have endangered an entire battalion. When President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck, the citation spoke of conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty. Coolidge listened politely. Later, when asked about Hill 623, he said only that he did what any sergeant would do when there was no officer around. He returned home after the war. He did not seek attention. He did not relive the battle unless asked directly. Hill 623 faded back into forest. The fog lifted. The shell craters filled with leaves. But for 3 days in October 1944, in rain and cold and silence, one man kept a line from breaking. That is the story of Technical Sergeant Charles Coolidge. They had the weight of numbers. Losses could be absorbed and the attacks could continue. Coolidge had 12 men on a hilltop with no relief in sight. The afternoon of October 26th brought something unexpected. The German attacks stopped. The forest fell silent. No probing fire. No harassment. Nothing. Coolidge recognized the silence. He had seen it before in Italy. The Germans paused only when they were preparing something decisive, when they were bringing up assets that would change the nature of the fight. He sent 2 men forward as scouts. They returned within the hour with information that confirmed his fears. Vehicles were moving in the German rear. Not trucks. Something heavier. They had heard the distinctive sound of tracked vehicles grinding through the forest, the metallic clank of tank treads on frozen ground. The Germans were bringing armor. Infantry alone had failed to break Hill 623. Machine guns alone had failed to dislodge the Americans. Tanks changed everything. A single armored vehicle could absorb machine gun fire indefinitely while its main gun methodically destroyed each American position. 2 tanks would make the work faster. Coolidge had one anti-tank weapon, a single bazooka. The M1 rocket launcher was theoretically capable of penetrating German armor at close range. Theoretically. In practice, it was unreliable. Rockets failed to detonate. Launchers misfired. Even successful hits often failed to disable a tank. Night fell on October 26th. Somewhere beyond the tree line, tank engines idled in the darkness. German infantry rested, knowing that tomorrow they would advance behind steel instead of dying in front of American machine guns. Coolidge checked the bazooka, 1 launcher, 3 rockets, and a decision that would determine whether his men lived or died at dawn. Dawn came on October 27, 1944, the 4th day. Coolidge had not slept in over 70 hours. His men managed brief moments of unconsciousness in their foxholes, but real rest was impossible. The cold prevented it. The fear prevented it. The knowledge that German tanks were waiting in the forest prevented it. The morning fog was thinner than previous days. Visibility stretched to 50 yards, then 60. Coolidge could see the tree line where German infantry had launched their assaults. He could see bodies still lying in the undergrowth. He could see the approach route the tanks would use. He heard them before he saw them. Metal grinding against earth. engines straining, the unmistakable sound of armored vehicles forcing their way through dense forest. Not one engine. Two. German infantry appeared first, advancing slowly, staying behind the tree line, waiting for the armor to clear a path. These soldiers moved differently from the attackers of previous days. They were patient, confident. They knew what was coming behind them. Then the tanks emerged from the fog. Two German armored vehicles pushed toward Hill 623. Their main guns traversed slowly, searching for targets. Hull and turret machine guns added to their firepower. Each tank carried enough ammunition to sustain hours of combat. Coolidge watched them advance. His Brownings were useless against armor. The water-cooled machine guns that had shattered infantry assaults for 3 days could fire until their barrels melted and accomplished nothing. The rounds would bounce off steel like rain off a roof. The bazooka was his only option. The M1 required close range to work. 50 yards was optimistic. 25 yards was realistic. To have any chance, Coolidge would have to leave cover and advance into the open while German infantry provided suppressing fire. He checked the launcher again. The electrical firing system appeared intact. 3 rockets ready. Everything that could be inspected had been inspected. The tanks continued forward. German infantry spread into assault formation behind them. This was the attack the previous 3 days had been building toward, armor and infantry working together, each covering the weakness of the other. Coolidge's machine gunners looked at him. They had held through everything the Germans had thrown at them. Now they faced tanks with nothing but one unreliable rocket launcher and a sergeant from Tennessee. The Germans closed to 100 yards. 80. 70. At 60 yards, the lead tank stopped. The turret hatch opened. A German officer stood in the cupola, fully exposed, unafraid. He called out in fluent English and demanded surrender. Tanks, infantry, overwhelming force. Continued resistance was pointless. Surrender now and they would be treated as prisoners of war. Coolidge stood up. He refused. The words were brief and carried clearly across the clearing. The German commander stared for a moment, then dropped back into the turret and slammed the hatch shut. The tank lurched forward. Infantry advanced. Coolidge grabbed the bazooka and climbed out of his foxhole. He did not run. He walked. The same steady pace he had used for 4 days while enemy fire cracked around him. The same calm movement that kept his men from panicking. 25 yards. That was the range he needed. German machine gun fire erupted. Tracers snapped past him. Infantry behind the tanks understood exactly what he intended. 40 yards. 35. 30. At 25 yards, Coolidge dropped to one knee, raised the launcher, aimed at the tank's glassy plate and pulled the trigger. Nothing. He pulled it again. Another hollow click. The bazooka was dead. Coolidge threw it aside. He was kneeling in the open, 25 yards from a German tank, with no weapon capable of stopping it. The tank's main gun began to traverse toward him. Infantry closed in behind the armor. Most men would have run. Coolidge did not. He gathered every grenade he could carry, his own, taken from wounded men, scavenged from German dead. His pockets bulged with explosives. Then he crawled forward. Machine gun fire chewed into the dirt around him. Earth sprayed into his face. He kept moving. He began throwing grenades not at the tank, but at the infantry. Explosions tore through German formations. Soldiers fell. Others dove for cover. Coolidge crawled between throws, closing distance, making each blast more lethal. Behind him, his machine gunners opened up. The Brownings could not stop tanks, but they shredded exposed infantry. Grenades from the front. Machine gun fire from the hill. The German assault collapsed into chaos. The infantry stalled. Tanks without infantry support became vulnerable. The German commanders recognized the problem. Their infantry was pinned. Their coordinated attack had disintegrated. The American sergeant, who should have been killed in the first seconds of his advance, was still throwing grenades, still inflicting casualties, still refusing to die. But the mathematics had not changed. Coolidge ran out of grenades. His machine gunners ran out of ammunition. The tanks were still operational, still advancing, and now his men had nothing left to stop them. 4 days of fighting had depleted every resource. Courage alone could not replace bullets and rockets. Coolidge made the decision commanders dread. He ordered a withdrawal. Not a retreat, not a rout, but an organized movement to the rear, each element covering the others, discipline maintained even as they abandoned the ground they had held for 4 days. The last man to leave Hill 623 was Technical Sergeant Charles Coolidge. The withdrawal was executed with precision that defied the circumstances. Coolidge positioned himself at the rear of the column, carbine ready, watching for pursuit as his men moved through the forest toward American lines. The pursuit never came. The German force that had spent 4 days trying to capture a single hilltop was too damaged to follow. Their infantry had suffered catastrophic casualties. The coordinated tank assault had collapsed into confusion. By the time German commanders reorganized, the Americans had vanished into the Vosges fog. Coolidge led his men back to battalion headquarters. 12 soldiers had held Hill 623 for 96 hours against a reinforced German company supported by armor. They had repelled more than a dozen assaults. They had inflicted an estimated 50 to 60 casualties. Not a single American had been killed. The wounded all survived. Battalion command was stunned. The position had been considered lost after the first day. When radio contact failed, headquarters assumed the force had been destroyed or captured. They had been written off. Now they walked back into American lines exhausted, frozen, out of ammunition, but alive. Every one of them. Word spread quickly through the 36th Division. Veterans of Italy and France understood the significance. Holding for 4 days was extraordinary. Holding without losing a single man was almost unprecedented. A Medal of Honor recommendation was initiated within days. Bureaucracy moved slowly. Statements were gathered. Reviews conducted. Months passed. Coolidge remained on the front lines throughout the process. Regulations said nominees should be removed from combat, but no one enforced it. He continued fighting through the winter of 1944 and into 1945 as the 36th Division pushed through the Vosges and into Germany. He had been offered a battlefield commission and refused. He had entered as an enlisted man and intended to leave the same way. The Medal of Honor was presented on June 18, 1945, at a bombed-out airfield near Dornstadt, Germany. The war had ended 5 weeks earlier. Coolidge was 23. The citation documented 4 days of continuous combat, leadership under fire, the advance against tanks with a malfunctioning bazooka, the grenade assault, the withdrawal that preserved his force. He wore the medal for photographs, then packed it away. He did not consider himself a hero. He had done what the situation required. He could have died. The bazooka could have fired. The outcome could have been different. The war was over. Charles Coolidge wanted to go home to Tennessee. He returned to Signal Mountain in the autumn of 1945, went back to work at the family printing business, married, raised a family, and lived quietly. He rarely spoke about the war. When asked about Hill 623, he spoke of his men. 12 soldiers. 12 men who held for 4 days. The medal represented them, not him. Decades passed. Reunions grew smaller. Recognition accumulated slowly. A highway was named for him. Park. France awarded him the Legion of Honor. A heritage center bearing his name opened in 2020. Coolidge attended at age 98, one of the last living World War II Medal of Honor recipients. Charles Coolidge died on April 6, 2021, at 99 years old. With his passing, an era closed. He had lived 76 years after Hill 623. When asked how he survived, his answer never changed. He did not care about himself. He cared about his men. 12 soldiers on a hilltop in France. A sergeant who refused to let them die. A position that should have fallen but held for 4 days. If the story moved you, hit like, subscribe, turn on notifications. We rescue forgotten stories. Real people. Real heroism. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Thank you for making sure Charles Coolidge does not disappear into silence.